We're back.
We're back.
The girls are back in town.
Anna's back from her travels in Boston.
Boston.
How's
Boston.
Boston.
I can't do the accent. I'm like, what's her name? Julianne Moore in 30 Rock. I just sound retarded and deaf.
I had an audition recently for a stripper with a Boston accent. I didn't go for it because I was like, I'm not gonna go in there and pretend to be from Boston.
All of our accents are just like they default to the Russian accent.
Yeah, call me when she's a sex slave.
Yeah. I was just telling Dasha, there are a lot of Russians in Boston. The place is teeming with them, which is hilarious. I drove by a Russian school of mathematics, much like the one I went to when I was a wee one.
And you posted a photo.
And I posted a photo, which was fun. It looked like a really crumbling Soviet structure.
It really did.
Like it looked architecturally significant.
You had that cool suit on.
Yeah.
Boston has a lot of haters.
Yeah.
Why do you think that is?
I don't know. I was actually really scrambling to understand why people hate Boston so much, because I've been there a couple of times, but as a kid, so I don't really remember. Much like Marianne Williamson, my past is a blur.
I only remember all the love I've given and received.
Yeah.
None of the bad stuff that's happened to me. Spoiler alert, we will be reviewing A Return to Love by Marianne Williamson.
Yeah.
In the second portion of the episode, so stay tuned.
Yeah, don't turn it off. I know that many people only make it through the first 10 minutes. So yeah, I don't know. I've like really struggled to understand why people hate Boston.
I kind of hate Boston, but I've never even been, haven't been there.
Yeah,
I've been to Massachusetts, but
it's like Boston's like the perfect example of one of those places that, or things or whatever, that people hate kind of preemptively without figuring out for themselves why it is they hate it.
Too many Irish Americans was sort of my impulse, is that it's this like Irish town where like what's their main industry, right? It's like education.
Yeah, like pompous intellectualism. I don't know.
And like medicine. It's like I like think everyone in Boston is either like some rowdy drunk Irishman or like a doctor.
I think the reality is much worse. They're kind of like boring, like Cambridge dwelling, Harvard educated tech bros.
Yeah.
And like liberals.
Tedious.
But I really liked it. I mean, I'm like surprisingly not contrarian when it comes to travel. I like everything. Like I'll eat anything, I'll see anything. My favorite museum is in Boston. I think people hate it because it's a very kind of ostensibly progressive and liberal city with a very woke veneer. Like everything, like all the churches were kind of covered in pride flags, but is a fundamentally kind of socially conservative city.
Right. Racist.
Yeah, in some sense, but it's kind of like a historic colonial city. So it's not even that it's like Irish American, it's very waspy,
right,
and elevated. But I don't know, I personally loved it. There are a lot of like good Russian markets.
The first time I was in New England, I was struck by the amount of like graves.
Yeah, there's a ton of like those unmarked.
Like, oh, it's really
weathered.
Like old here.
Yeah,
because I've been on the West Coast my whole life, where everything's like was built in the 60s, and in Las Vegas even like earlier or later than that.
Yeah, I
so
mean,
when I first went to New England, I was like, oh my god, look at all these old buildings.
Yeah, like Las Vegas was like built in one day in like the 1940s or something.
My high school in Las Vegas was a historical landmark. It was like one of the oldest buildings, and it was built in the 40s.
Yeah. There you go. And all those casinos went up in like the 70s, and the rest is history.
And then they get torn down periodically, and new ones get erected.
Did you know that Brandy Melville is selling a Las Vegas t-shirt?
No.
You have to get it. It just says Las Vegas. They really know how to pick all the places that will trigger the libs.
Totally.
It's like
Martha's
Cape
Vineyard.
Cod. Yeah.
Hamptons.
But yeah, I have a theory that the people who hate Boston the most are basically Aravistes to like hipper, more international cities like New York and LA, who've desperately like clawed their way up the totem pole,
right,
and hate Boston because it reminds them of their like own lingering provincialism.
Wow.
I mean, that's just my theory.
That
was ghostwritten
good
by my boyfriend who's from Brookline, home of the Kennedy family and Marky Mark.
Ooh.
Known racists.
Wow.
We actually drove through Louis C.K.'s old neighborhood.
Interesting.
Yeah.
He's from Boston as well.
He's from Brookline, I think.
Oh wow.
All the greats, all the pussy grabbers and congenital rapists.
Just kidding, Louie. Come on the pod.
Yeah.
Come on the show.
The difference between like New England and Southern racism is that New England racism is little bit like more polite and elevated.
Mm-hmm.
Like it's like hedged in like mannered etiquette.
And in the South, it's like unbridled and dark.
Yeah.
Like lynching.
They're like burning
legacy
crosses and flying Confederate flags.
It's much more visceral down there, the racism.
Yeah.
In New York, it doesn't exist.
Yeah, so check out my Medium post about why it's uncool to hate Boston. Boston has like a really long history of like educational excellence.
Uh-huh.
And there's a lot of Jews too.
What do you like better,
well
Boston
Russians.
or Philly?
That's a good question.
Because I kind of was like, Philly sucks.
They're neck and neck for me. I'm a person who grew up in the East Coast suburbs, so I'm kind of used to cities like Trenton,
right,
that are like boring and kind of corporate and featureless.
Yeah, I mean, I love a strip mall as much as the next gal. It's just, I don't know, maybe it is a West Coast thing.
Yeah, like kind of like Las Vegas is kind of almost like the Route 18 of the West, because Route 18, for those who don't know, is a historic route in New Jersey where a lot of the Sopranos scenes were filmed, and it's like low-lying strip malls. I should say that Route 18 is the Las Vegas of the East Coast.
Right. That's more accurate.
Yeah, I'm just being a nasty bitch. But in Boston, they do have Free People and Lululemon and Sweet Green and all the brands we've come to know and love here in New York City.
Right. Dig in.
Yeah, they do. I'm sure they do.
All right, maybe I'll give Boston a chance.
Yeah, give it a spin. They have Qdoba, which is the superior Chipotle. So that's a win for them.
Qdoba is the superior.
Yeah,
Chipotle.
those people have cilantro.
They don't have Baja Fresh up in the East Coast, though.
No.
Shout out to all my Baja heads.
Yeah. Or what's the burger joint? The not Carl's Jr. In-N-Out.
In-N-Out. Yeah, that's a Cali thing.
The old In-Out.
I really haven't been eating. Can I be honest?
You have a what?
I've been having a really hard time eating.
Yeah,
I'm really malnourished.
Good for you.
No.
You've been reading butt chugging that Marianne Williamson. It's the only like sustenance you need.
I'm spiritually very full, but physically very weak and hungry.
This is a spoiler. We'll get to it later. But in the book, Williamson describes her kind of white girl struggles with weight, where she's like fluctuating. She's like, I wasn't fat enough to be called fat, but I was like 10 or 15 pounds overweight.
I just couldn't lose it, and I would diet and then gain it back.
And then when she accepted the Holy Spirit into her consciousness, the pounds just melted off.
Yep. She says early on also that she would gain the weight back because she was afraid of what it was like to be beautiful.
Yeah, I love that. The only thing worse than not getting any male attention is getting male attention. I think that's a direct quote from her book.
Amazing.
Yeah, it's like a Roger Stoneism.
Today this thought did enter my mind, and this is the kind of shit people really hate us for, but it did occur to me that God must love me because he made me skinny. No,
Dasha, he gave you the discipline to stay thin. It's in all of us.
But it doesn't even take discipline because I just lack an interest in food.
Yeah.
I'm not like a gluttonous person.
Well, you're an eat to live, not a live to eat person, as am I.
Right.
Which kind of suits itself to like...
I'm an angel.
Yeah. A cherub. An angel sent from above. Yeah, so those are, I guess, my impressions of Boston.
Cool. I'm not going to ever go if I can help it.
You should go to Isabella Stewart Gardner, which is like legitimately a perfect and peaceful museum, and like so tastefully and thoughtfully curated. Like if I could curate a museum, I would curate that museum. I wouldn't change a single thing about it, except for the ugly neoliberal cube they threw over the original facade a couple of years ago. But yeah,
I'm a big fan of. Is this episode boring? I'm a big fan of the Norton Simon in Pasadena. That's one of my favorite museums.
But that sounds like it was a museum based on a guy, which is cool.
A guy's art collection. It's like a man's art collection.
Those are the best ones.
Tasteful and
done. All right.
Nice bouillards up in there. What's on the docket?
Death, drudgery, despair, and Andy Ngo.
Andy.
Yeah, we said we would not attempt to pronounce that name.
It's no. Right?
Yeah, but God forbid some woke leftist who hates our guts, cuts all the parts of us saying his name, mispronouncing it out of context, and throws them into like a master.
It's
cut.
no.
Yeah.
Why do they do that with the G?
I don't know. I'm not prepared to
Nguyen.
incriminate myself.
No. No.
Gnocchi.
Gnocchi. Yeah, it's like a kind of a soft G, like in gnocchi.
Yeah.
Okay. That makes sense.
So we're going to talk about him, and then Trump's recent meeting with Kim Jong-un
In North Korea.
Yeah,
His second meeting with Kim Jong-un, but it's the first time any president has been on North Korean soil.
Really? Okay.
Yeah, that's what I read.
Amazing.
I'm sure it's true.
I wonder how he's definitely like the tallest person there.
Oh yeah, by far. He's
because
huge.
not only are they Asian, but they're also extremely malnourished.
Very small over there in NK.
Yeah.
NKPR. Oh, so yeah, Andy Ngo is some kind of alt-right journalist.
In scare quotes, yeah.
Who was a writer for Quillette, I guess, or founded it or something. And
he wrote for the New York Post too, right? I don't know. I just kind of briefly looked this up.
He went to a Antifa rally in Portland a few days ago where he was violently attacked. And had a milkshake thrown on him, which is one of the contemporary Antifa's favorite anti-fascist tactics. And he ended up in the hospital. He had a GoFundMe that raised like over $100,000 or something. And this sparked a big discourse on Twitter about the violent tactics of Antifa and their efficacy. And that I wasn't really online for a couple of days because I was having a lot of fun with my friends, drinking alcohol. So then I caught up sort of in the span of a morning, and then my mind was like a symphony of hot takes. Because I was like, Antifa, horrible, corny, stupid. Andy Ngo, loser. Portland sucks. Nothing relevant happens in Portland.
No.
Why are there Antifa rallies in Portland? I understand that Oregon has a history of like white nationalism.
Right.
But Portland is like a predominantly white, very culturally liberal city where it doesn't seem like people should feel a need to rally to signal that they're against fascism.
Against some marginal, mostly made up white nationalist threat. I mean, nail us to the cross for saying this, but there's a reason that these rallies largely take place in progressive cities with a few significant exceptions.
So everyone essentially is LARPing. Even like the Proud Boys are basically LARPing as Nazis. Antifas are LARPing as like people who have any political convictions. And they're just splashing each other with milk and beating each other up.
Yeah, and the milk was so basically allegedly he expressed concern online that he would be targeted beforehand, but went anyway because, quote, he believes it's important to expose Antifa's tactics, particularly following the violent rally in Charlottesville, Virginia last year that featured both Antifa and white supremacists. And I was like, you lost me there, buddy. These people don't need exposing. They don't need any more press. It's like a fairly marginal crowd of pent-up, precarious losers who have misallocated their energies, again, into a mostly speculative threat.
The only one giving Antifa press is these right-wing news outlets for whom Antifa is basically like a perfect little media bundle.
Right.
You know, they're just affirming each other's stupid ass worldviews.
Well, yeah, and
like
it's interesting.
Ouroboros.
It's interesting because, of course, conservative publications and talking heads scrambled to his defense, and they basically said that if this was a liberal journalist getting beat up by white nationalists, it would definitely make the front page of the New York Times, while the liberal outlets and pundits were suspiciously quiet about the attack, like save to issue kind of the predictably lukewarm condemnation of violence, which they then qualified with the fact that, yes, this guy was like amplifying Islamophobia, and yes, this guy is constantly provoking his adversaries.
Yeah. I saw some people say he's into phrenology.
You saw what?
Some people saying that he was into phrenology, like race science and stuff.
Isn't he Asian? Aren't those
Right.
people
He's
like
also
always
fat, gay, and Asian, and a loser, and like not a threat to anyone.
yeah,
And like
Chubby.
barely
pudgy.
Okay, fluffy, disseminating his ideas to, I don't know. And so the take I eventually kind of landed on was that Americans are too precious about violence and more people should get beat up.
I mean, that's not no. It's, you know, getting beat up is often a rite of passage.
Yeah,
for
in
some
Russia, people beat each other up for fun.
Yeah, to steal each other's like sneakers or
Gold
starter
teeth.
jackets. Yeah.
In Russia, my grandpa beat up a guy to rip the gold teeth out of his mouth. And that was a valuable learning experience for both of them.
I mean, the only problem with Americans getting beat up is it happens to them way too late in life.
Yeah.
It should happen when you're in high school, not when you're like, I'm guessing he's like a 20 or 30-ish investigative
right.
journalist.
He's never been punched in the face before. The right-wing media outlets then also went on to claim that he had a brain hemorrhage, that he was like on the brink of death.
They also
which
said
was plainly not true, because if you look at him, like, I've seen worse bruises on like girls on Finstagram, honestly.
on Dan Allegretto.
Yeah.
He should have really blamed that bruise on Antifa.
Oh my God.
I feel so stupid because I should have, every time I spill red wine on my white denim at Baccarat, I'm just going to start a Kickstarter. Like, these guys accused me of being a fascist. They were wearing balaclavas. I didn't really get a look for what they look like. But like, of course, the conservatives are not wrong that if this was a liberal beat up by fascists, it would indeed be front page of the New York Times. But that's like totally irrelevant in a way, because that's how it works now. Like, both sides are kind of, you know, putatively right about each other, but the way that they approach each other is really ass backwards and wrong.
Right. Well, then you saw the Antifas on Twitter sort of doubling down in this bizarre way, where they were like, yes, we're doing violence, but it's in self-defense because fascism is a threat to everyone's well-being. And then there was this other like strain way in which they were talking about it, where they were like, we're just throwing milkshakes at people and like sparkles, and like we're not, you know, like sometimes we use our fists, but mostly we're out there like fighting the good fight in a way that's not like an overt threat.
Yeah,
like
well,
in this very like incoherent, contradictory, like,
yeah, pick one. Either you're, you know, spraying people with glitter or you're punching their lights out.
Yeah, either you're a political organization or you're just like a random mob of people who have fantasies of like fighting in the streets.
Yeah, and also like, I mean, I really kind of object to this thing that's like popular on both the right and the left, though more on the left. The right, even if they're bad faith, they're at least more nominally open to having dialogues with people with different views and beliefs. The left is like completely shut down, and we have to remember that the people that they're lashing out against are not like the Koch brothers. They're not like nefarious right-wing oligarchs or politicians. They're equally precarious people who have doubled down on like a shitty worldview.
Right. If you want to make a political impact, don't punch Andy Ngo, like kidnap a businessman.
Yeah.
Or like kill a senator, or
cut his little toe off and mail it to his wife and daughter.
You know, like it's so sad how impotent Antifa actually is, because it's sort of as just like a symptom of how like this is kind of the best we can do. Yeah,
and like I think you said this, but like, do these people really think that if they went back in time, they would stand a chance against actual fascists? Those people would mow over them in a tank. They wouldn't even get to the concentration camp portion of the evening. It would just be like game over.
Right, because someone quote tweeted a tweet of mine that said basically Antifa is for corny losers, but getting beat up also isn't that big of a deal.
Yeah.
In response to someone calling us Nazis, I pointed out that my family was actually murdered by Nazis and buried in a mass grave. And then this girl took it upon herself to tell me that that would happen again if if I kept running my mouth the way I have been about Antifa.
That sounds like a threat.
It sounds like she wants to kill my whole family. But what she meant was, I assume, that like, and the Antifa is the only thing keeping
It's the only bulwark
me and my family safe from being married and buried in a mass grave.
Yeah, I mean, listen, we on Red Scare are not beyond having an identity politic. Like I said, I've had relatives who were gassed at Auschwitz. So we have no firsthand experience, but like, I think we know a thing or two about
Fascism.
how those things work. But it's like, it's interesting because like, of course the conservatives are defending Ngo, NGO, because he's kind of their self-appointed token hire through which they can normalize their twisted views.
Right.
Like, they can basically be like, well, look, here's a chubby gay Asian guy saying that we're right.
Self-loathing Asian fellow.
Yeah, and if indeed, I mean, we didn't fact check this claim, but if indeed he's into phrenology, it's like, sorry, but like non-white people are like at the wrong end of the calibers historically.
Right. I mean, I don't know what kind of phrenology he's into. There's probably a lot of theories.
But yeah, I mean, the whole thing is like really intense and crazy. And since this is a self-help episode, I was thinking of this.
A more focused self-help episode. Maybe that's a good idea.
Submit your outfits and we'll roast them.
Well, what were you going to say?
No, there's this great quote from Alain de Botton, of all people, who's another one of these self-help gurus, where he basically says, when a culture doesn't provide people with dignity, they seek fame. And everything in our culture now has to be inclusive of everyone because our politics no longer serve anyone. So people are like hysterically seeking attention because they don't have basic social services.
Well, Antifa's not seeking attention. They're anonymous. That's why they wear those masks. I don't know what's happening psychologically with someone who takes it upon themselves to go to a rally to get in a fight with, quote, fascists.
Yeah.
But it is concerning. I mean, I don't think anyone's going to attack me. I'm not afraid.
Yeah.
But when you do expand the definition of fascist, as people seem to be doing, to include people like us, then it becomes fair game
to punch anyone. Yeah.
In self-defense because you don't like their fascistic politics.
Yeah, I'm gonna go punch the Arab guy at the bodega for charging me $1.50 for coffee when it's $1. But it's interesting how like sexual or self-expression and like sex positivity and even like, thrilling coercions to violence have become the norm because they're kind of the ones controlling the dopamine levers now.
Right.
Like that's where people get their buzz.
That's
because there's like there's no dignity to be found or comfort in everyday life. I mean, you're right that the Antifa is like a collection, like a motley collection of anonymous people. And so they're not like individually seeking glory or fame, but even as a collective unit,
except the ones on Twitter.
Who have Antifa in their Twitter bio.
Yeah, and little black flags and like
Antifada.
Don't get me started.
I'm not going to go there.
We're not allowed. We need to be vessels for God's light.
Yeah.
We're not.
That's it. We're turning over a positive
We
new
should be
leaf
praying for the Antifada.
to triumph and throw us in a mass grave with our parents.
For being fascist.
I wouldn't be surprised if somebody threw like an iced coffee at one of our heads.
Yeah, I wouldn't either, actually. I mean, I'm not scared of physical violence, but because once again, I long for death, but, and I said this on Twitter. I'm just going to repeat myself. I feel like I'm constantly surrounded by like homosexuals.
Yeah.
Who would protect me.
Yeah.
And
like Paul Coupo.
Paul Coupo would fucking.
He would be swinging those fists.
If someone fucking tried, Paul Coupo would be there. I have complete trust that he would kill someone for me.
I'm all for the era of like homosexuals taking the mantle from straight men and becoming like macho aggressive brutes. That would be cool.
Paul Coupo makes you hold his Telfar bag while he beats the shit out of someone
on like a cruise.
You literally be like, Dasha, do you want this guy to sit next to you? And I'll be like, yeah, it's okay. And he's like, just tell me if you don't, because I'll
He's the producer. He's my agent.
That's my agent. And I had one more point I wanted to make that we've made before, but it bears repeating, that the whole rhetoric of anti-fascism is also extremely Eurocentric.
Right.
And doesn't refer, and like the whole preoccupation with Nazis in World War II and like the literal SS kind of is like concerns something that doesn't have an American legacy.
Well, right.
It's not grounded. There's not like real context for you to be so upset about fascists.
Well, that's like going back to that brilliant point that Zizek made in the essay of why he will continue to support Trump, which is that the analogy is not to look backwards and talk about how our present situation looks a lot like the past, but rather what people in the past would think of the situation now here. And it also reminds me of a point that Juliana Huxtable made on one of our early EPs, that kind of the Eurocentric language of like the Third Reich and Nazism and fascism really kind of whitewashes and glosses over the actual history of American racism against the black slaves and their descendants.
Right. Yeah.
Like it's
particular racialized history.
Yeah.
Which you can, I guess, call fascism.
Yeah, and like,
but it does it sort of a disservice to the reality of the situation.
Yeah,
by comparing it to like the Third Reich, exactly.
Yeah, and there's I saw this tweet today. Sorry, our podcast is really just becoming like a recap of Twitter. But I saw a tweet today by this woman, which I didn't bother to explore further. So if she turns out to be a fascist, my apologies, mea culpa in advance. But she was like, white women really know how to make it about themselves. And it was one of these like stupid, reductive, like white people tweets, but it had a ring of truth to it because, people like Antifa really knows how to make it about themselves. Like overeducated white liberals really know how to turn a cause against the people whose interests it was designed to protect in service of their own kind of victimhood narrative.
It's just so repulsive to me on an aesthetic level.
Yeah.
Is what it comes down to, is when I think about people in Portland splashing milkshakes on each other, I think it's the loseriest shit of all time.
I know. Who knew that, like...
And I don't even know who's the bigger loser in the situation. I guess Andy Ngo, because he got his ass kicked.
Well, because he practically asked to get his ass kicked. I know we're not supposed to victim blame, but he was really asking for it. He was
begging for it.
He really like rollerbladed into that pride parade asking for a black eye. My parents always used to say, like, you're really asking for it now, before they beat the dog shit out of me in a closet. No, I'm kidding. But like, I like how Williamson said that, in our modern era, we love to blame our parents. But they may have been mean and relentless, but they're not nearly as vicious as we are to ourselves. And I was like, yes, queen. I'm going to buy those $700 shoes to reward myself.
To be kind to myself.
Yeah, but it's like, this is the name of the game now, like dramatizing and exposing violent impulses on the other side. Everybody's like a truffle swine scrounging around for the most damning evidence of the worst excesses of their enemies so they can repackage them and recruit them to their cause.
Truffle swine, I love that.
Yeah, we like pigs on this show. But yeah, it's like...
I stopped eating pork. Did I tell you already?
That's great. I did too.
Really?
The stars really are aligned.
Well, I met a pig in Canada named Chris.
Yeah, you were saying. And it really turned you off.
I can't. I think about his little snout and stuff.
I know.
They're so smart. I know cows are kind of smart too, but they're more, I don't know.
Docile.
Yeah, they don't have the intelligence of a pig.
Yeah, pigs really go kicking and screaming to their deaths.
They think they know they're going to die.
Yeah.
Shout out to my pay pig also. Speaking of pigs, I'm so glad you're in my life, you worthless piece of shit.
Mazel.
I'm sure he's listening and edging.
Did he pay you for that endorsement? He's like, Dasha, I want you to call me a loser.
I hope he fucking does. He didn't ask me to endorse him. He should be ashamed of himself.
Well, now he's really gonna come. But yeah, it's not surprising and not wholly not understandable that people on every side would think of everyone else who isn't them as being cynical careerists.
Yep.
And I'm sure like Andrew,
except for us,
Andrew,
we're
Yang,
the only honorable girls,
girls
in the game.
But I'm sure this journalist guy really thinks he's acting in good faith by exposing the antics of the Antifa. Antifa, I never...
It should be, well, it's Antifa, but it should be Antifa, right?
Yeah.
Because fascist.
In Boston, they say Antifa.
Antifa. Hey, you got these Antifa guys coming up in here. I sound like Mike Racine.
Yeah.
Oh, hey, Anna.
He's probably he's probably an accurate approximation of the Boston accent. Just kidding, he's not even remotely. But Boston does have a lot of Italians too, and so does Providence,
That
which is
kind
cool.
of speech flavor.
Yeah. Trump
Went to North Korea.
Yeah.
Very cool. Dems are mad, but haters, hoes are gonna get mad.
I'm just thinking about the logistics of him going on a plane and
he
going
tweeted. Do you remember the tweet that he sent out before he went? No, he tweeted before he went to Korea that he would be open to meeting with Kim Jong-un like on the border. It was a very weird. God, you talk for a little bit while I look for it. Actually,
okay, sure. I don't know anything about Trump's meeting to North Korea, save for this brief article that I read while that you sent to me. But basically, he is kind of forcing the issue because he had a deal with the Koreans, and also the election is coming up, and of course the elephant in the room is China. Because they're sort of negotiating with Pyongyang. Is that how you pronounce another one of those silent G's?
Why do they do that?
And I think the rush to, I don't know, I think we do it in transliterating their language.
Why?
Because I think it's their phonetic system that we're being extremely disrespectful of at this present moment. But I think they're trying to kind of force talks because they want to get the Koreas out from under the influence of China, basically. They want to be the preeminent sphere of influence up in there.
I found the tweet.
Okay.
After some very important meetings, including my meeting with President Xi of China, I will be leaving Japan for South Korea. While there, if Chairman Kim of North Korea sees this, I would meet him at the border/DMZ just to shake his hand and say, hello, and then parentheses, question mark, exclamation point.
That's weird. He's going to meet him on TMZ, on World Star Hip Hop.
That's like such insane diplomacy.
Yeah. And so the article that you sent me, I forgot where it came from, but they were basically saying that Trump is, a horrific authoritarian leader, but he's actually right in going on this diplomatic mission.
Yeah.
I mean,
he's doing all the right things.
Yeah. You can't really take this whole I don't negotiate with terrorists thing totally at face value, because we live in a global community now, whether you like it or not, and we have to negotiate with other people. With
terrorists, exactly.
And I think, like, if I were to psychoanalyze it, Kim probably thinks of Trump as like kind of a useful idiot who he can manipulate to do his bidding in the States, and Trump probably feels honored.
You don't think Kim is kind of an idiot?
I mean, they probably both are.
They probably just like each other.
Yeah, but like I think Trump probably feels honored that kind of a global villain has seen some redeeming quality in him.
Totally. Well, he gets a lot of flack.
Yeah. He's like Tulsi meeting with all the besmirched leaders of the world.
Speaking of Tulsi.
Yeah.
The Vogue photo shoot of 5 female presidential candidates.
The girl bosses. It was the article. It's like a cover story, I think. I'm not certain because I don't read Vogue because I'm not a dumb bitch. Just kidding. I read Vogue at the nail salon.
Just kidding. Profile us in
Vogue. If anybody wants us to be in Vogue.
Anyone wants us to be in Vogue, we'll do it in a second, obviously.
No, but it's like it was accompanied by a photo shoot by Annie Leibovitz, who was formerly famously known as Susan Sontag's lesbian life partner and is now kind of like the hired hand / court jester of the liberal establishment.
She is different from the woman who takes the photographs of babies.
Yeah, that's shit.
That's always who I think Annie Leibovitz is.
I think she's also called Annie.
Yeah,
she's like different from the guy who takes the photographs of the Weimar runners, right? But it's like these dramatic kind of Gainsborough like spreads.
Yeah.
that are almost a nod to the Renaissance, or like Caravaggio, because it's a bunch of people in light and shadow.
Yeah,
and so it was,
Tulsi in the back.
Yeah, looking like cringing.
Warren in red. Powerful.
Yeah. What did you think of the photo shoot?
Disgusting. Come on. The high-fiving.
Yeah, there's a photo where they're all
Kamala is
high-fiving.
high-fiving Klobuchar, and Gillibrand is high-fiving Warren, and then Tulsi's kind of wincing in the background.
In the background, yeah. She's like crouching in the background like a Jew under the floorboards.
It's weird because I don't see the only real female candidate amongst them.
Yeah, Marianne Williamson.
Is this just a picture of a bunch of lizards?
You don't say.
Because I remember there being a woman on the debate stage who made quite a splash. Who's going to be at the second debate, by the way, if you're listening.
She made it. I mean, she made it, and we can talk about that. I personally think that she's the Donald Trump of the left and has a solid chance of winning.
I was saying this.
I wouldn't be surprised if she wins, like flying in the face of all the official polls, much like Trump did in 2016.
I think it's a little too early to call it, but I have a psychic feeling.
Yeah, but listen, I like to be right, but I'm not scared to be wrong, so...
Hell yeah.
That's our Red Scare prediction.
I like to be right, but I'm not scared to be wrong. That's great. You should write a self-help book.
Yeah, I might.
So Marianne responded on Instagram and said, "You might have noticed who's not in this picture, and let's be clear why it matters. The issue is ethical responsibility on the part of the media. The framers of the Constitution did not make Vogue magazine the gatekeepers of America's political process, here to determine who and who is not to be considered a serious political candidate." Blah, blah, blah. She quotes Franklin Roosevelt. If we're going to free this country to be all it can be, then first we have to free ourselves from the thought forms dictated to us by a corporate political media establishment. It is the people and the people alone who should decide who will be their president, unburdened by the insidious influence of an elite on patrol. Period. Full stop. Hashtag big truth. Marianne2020.com. She's right.
She's not wrong.
And Vogue said that they didn't include her because she's not an elected official.
Which is bullshit, because last time I checked, a not elected official won the presidency.
Yup.
I mean, say what you will, but she's a serious contender now.
Yeah.
But she calls, I think, like...
She's got a better chance than Gillibrand. That's for fucking sure.
Yeah, no, totally. I mean, Gillibrand has like 0.00001 of the polls. And the article actually reports, kind of in the name of impartiality, how she is the one that's most comfortable using her like feminist or female identity, and how she's basically posted up in the wing.
Yeah, I don't think even one meme has been made about Gillibrand.
I know, she's so unmemorable.
There's nothing to say.
The greatest insult is not being memed. It's not being memed at all. But
that was a little confusing, but I get the idea.
But like, she basically called Marianne Williamson, I find very captivating, but also very scary and dangerous. I'm going to play a little devil's advocate on this here podcast.
I'm up for it.
And martyr myself. But she says things with such authority and conviction and flair that sometimes it takes a minute to realize that she's wrong. Much like us, which is why she's truly
the Red Scare candidate.
That and she's really committed to like being a size zero and casually name drops famous philosophers without like really understanding what she's like. Carl Jung, Freud's theory of the superego.
I believe she's dabbled.
No, she has certainly, but she called Vogue in that Instagram post. She called them the gatekeepers, or she said that they were kind of vying for the position of the gatekeepers of America's political process, which is not entirely true. They are vying to be the gatekeepers of a certain liberal consciousness, along with like the New York Times and Washington Post, like the Democracy Dies in Darkness crowd. I mean, you remember when they published that like raving, gushing, runaway, glowing piece on Asma al-Assad, and then had to pull a Beyonce and like literally remove all mention of the issue, because then it turned out that, surprise, Assad was a dictator and his wife was complicit, and that she also bought a lot of shoes while the country starved.
I don't remember that.
This was this was before your time, but this was a couple of years ago, and it was a serious scandal.
Right.
because Vogue will literally kind of publish glowing profiles of any exotic third world first lady who, you know, big surprise again, turns out to be totally evil.
Complicit in war crimes.
Yeah. But the article itself was really, I mean, we can briefly talk about it. I mean, it unironically cites the power of AOC's Instagram.
Oh, the Vogue about the presidential candidates, right?
Yeah, and it cites certain statistics that women candidates receive more negative press and go viral less.
Well, one of them's going viral.
Yeah, just not the one they want. Once again, it's really interesting. I mean, it reminds me of kind of the classic liberal attack on conservative like women like Ann Coulter and Kellyanne Conway, who are jokes, but they definitely garner more viral press than
they have a personality.
Anybody on the left, yeah, because they're kind of shock jocks.
I mean, let's say what everyone's thinking. Marianne's too pretty to be
in Vogue.
If she was amongst, if it were the six of them, we know who'd be the standout star.
Dasha, that's brilliant. It's almost like the other 5 candidates conspired to leave her out of the photo shoot
because she's too pretty.
Yeah, it's like being an average person, like one of those orphans standing next to Angelina Jolie, and then you realize how like plain everybody else looks. No woman wants that.
It's the charisma emanating from
but
her.
This woman who wrote the
undeniable.
piece, I guess, was a former Times staffer or something, but she talks about how in 2016 she wrote a story that was never published for the Times because it anticipated a Hillary win. So it was like one of those obituaries that was fully written and that they were planning on running. They had their finger on the sounds like you need some dick button, and then it like all went downhill. But and she talks about how debates about who is electable or not have been a smokescreen for lingering discomfort with what we have still after 243 years as a republic never seen, the election of a woman president. And it's actually the other way around. Debates over whether we're ready for a woman president are a smokescreen for the fact that very few of these candidates are electable. They're only electable because Trump is in power and everybody wants him out, and he's turned America into the world's laughing stock.
Right. Sorry, I'm looking.
No.
We must all remember that Hillary won the popular vote. Kristen Gillibrand says she was genuinely seen as the most qualified candidate. Well, maybe that's not what people want.
Yeah, and she sort of cites kind of Kamala Harris's, quote, blistering critique of Biden's civil rights record in the first debate, which she delivered with military precision, which is also hilarious, as we've noted, given that Kamala Harris has an equally abominable civil rights record.
As a criminal prosecutor.
Yeah.
Ugh, this is so long. I don't want to know.
I mean, there's nothing to know.
I don't care what Klobuchar has been up to.
They do address the Klobuchar being mean to her staffers and eating salad with a comb thing.
Yeah. It's because of the pressure on female bosses to not be cruel. To not be cruel and oppressive to their underlings.
Yeah, I mean, and certainly like sexism is part of the problem.
No,
I mean it is on some level, but it's not, but it's kind of incidental.
I mean, Jeffrey Tamgar got Me Too'd for being an asshole, not for being a sex pest, you know?
Well, right,
People don't like assholes of all walks of life.
Period.
Men get away with it more, sure, I guess, or it can be seen as more authoritative.
It's just seen as typically masculine. I think it is shocking to a lot of people that women can be just as cruel and vindictive as men. And there's certainly like a level of sexism that's like a little bit too hysterical or histrionic to be purely concerned with like the merits of the candidates. But I think if you're a woman and you sign up to be a politician, you kind of know what you're getting into.
Yeah.
It's a real like rat race.
I mean, I think it's a really ineffective strategy for a woman to like capitulate to male power and to try and like present in an empowered and masculine way.
Yeah,
the way
it doesn't
that politicians
work.
often do. Which is another thing I really like about Marianne.
Yeah, she's kind of like a sex bot. She's 100% woman.
I think that she is extremely powerful in a way that is like very seductive. And I think that seductive forces are underestimated.
Well,
by
yeah, she's
people.
really taken like Camille Paglia's point that women are equal but different from men, and that they have
Yin
like
and
an
yang,
immense
baby.
reservoir of female sexual power that they have at their disposal and that they refuse to exploit.
Baudrillard, if I may,
Who?
has a book called Seduction that touches sort of on this, but where he says that seduction knows neither equivalence nor value and isn't soluble in power. And he sort of places it conceptually in opposition to like productive forces, which are like masculine. And then seductive forces are sort of the feminine side of it. But because they're more like amorphous and interesting, they're not
mysterious and unofficial.
Exactly.
They're like behind closed doors. And that's kind of the gamble that women made when they entered private or public life as political figures.
Is relinquishing the power that they have.
That they wielded it. They wielded tremendous power. I mean, like, again, I've made this point, but if you look at the Quran, right, the gist of that in pertaining to women is basically like, well, women are charged with the rearing and education of children, which is kind of the most tremendous social power I can think of, because you are literally responsible, like literally and figuratively, for the future.
Girlfriend, you are so on. Well, Nietzsche also said he like warned against women becoming, quote, enlightened in the like culturally enlightened use of the word, the way that men are, and like becoming a part of public civil life, because he felt that in nature women already had first rank. And like that as people become more civilized, they become more weak.
Right. No, that's absolutely true on some level, and we'll probably get accused of being fascists for saying this, but feminists are very touchy about the fact that their women's contribution to history has been erased, and there's this idea that men wrote history and built civilization, but I believe they wrote history and built civilization for the benefit of women and children. Why else fight wars?
Well, I have a theory about that it is, I mean, perhaps partly for the benefit of women and children, but I think it also comes from primordial anxiety of being
emasculated,
of not being able to bear children, of not having this like immediate primary relationship with nature and the world as a fertile person who is able to get pregnant.
Yeah.
So then they compensate by like
creating
erecting
wars.
Civilizations, and like wars even more so. It's like, yeah, violence can be seen as like a way of like
we're really here.
I think we're trying to figure it out. I stay tuned, but
theorizing the pussy. No, I mean, like,
yeah, because they can't be. Women didn't feel compelled to create civilization because they were already having
henpecking their husbands behind closed doors. But no,
they were already having a very like vital and meaningful human experience. They didn't need any compensation.
Yeah, women had such a primary role in natural destruction that men had to invent war to compete with women. And now the feminists have it ass backwards because they're literally competing with men.
They really do, Anna.
They need to like harness their powers of seduction. And interestingly, the reason that the debate between Hillary and Trump was so kind of off-puttingly hilarious is because Trump didn't respond to Hillary's masculinized language. It will be interesting if Marianne Williamson makes it to the final debate with Trump, because I think she's the only woman who can one-up him, because the only language he responds to, like the only female language he responds to, is the language of seduction.
She would bewitch him.
She can do like a Judy Garland hit and really like put him on his knees.
He starts singing.
Yeah.
How many boyfriends do you think she's had?
A lot.
So many.
Well, you were saying that in the book, she basically talks about how she went from relationship, city to city, burning bridges and being a dramatic, messy bitch.
Yeah.
Like, this sounds like a grifter.
But God, what a good one. Shall we get into a return to love?
The nuts and bolts, the nitty gritty of her book. Yeah. Yeah. It's interesting that Vogue didn't just run a profile of Marianne Williamson. I think The Cut or the New York Magazine did.
BuzzFeed News did.
Well,
that was actually like early in her campaign and like thoughtful and like, you know, was surprisingly actually well written.
Yeah, and she's
I don't think there has been.
She's lucky that she didn't get profiled in that Vogue piece because it lets her rest her laurels on her status as an underdog.
And it actually, it makes her stand out.
Yeah, and it makes her humanizing because like nobody who gets an official profile is kind of taken seriously these days. We know that the media exists for the media. It exists for other people in the media.
Right.
But yeah, so you read the book.
her absence was noticed.
Yeah.
Yeah, I
Which
read
is
the
more
book.
powerful than being in a photo shoot with 5 other chicks who have internalized like the feminist slogan, keep your friends close and your enemies close.
Exactly. Yeah, I read her book. Wherein she outlines so early in her enlightenment as a spiritual guide, she took a class called A Course in Miracles.
Yeah, we should talk about this.
Which I'm sort of fuzzy on what she describes, some kind of guidebook. She like came upon this course in a volatile time in her life. She was very lost and troubled. She was smoking marijuana with her brother when he told her
her like a virus
that she had been lost her entire life.
I think he told her you're weird and nobody likes you when you walk into the room. Because like, you know, lo and behold, she was like the weird, lonely, gothy girl, and all the guys in the school were secretly horny for her.
I love this
personal projection that we're doing. So no, A Course in Miracles, ACIM, is a 1976 book by this woman Helen Schumann, which has a curriculum that aims to assist its readers in achieving spiritual transformation. I back to Paglia for a minute. There's a really great passage in where she talks about how Foucault habitually hid his sources because he was being intellectually deceitful. And I think Williamson is doing a little bit of that here. Like she's
citing her sources.
She does, but she cites it in a way because she knows most people are incurious and are not going to bother to research, which is why we're doing that. It's like most people only read the headline and get angry on Twitter.
Right.
She knows that A Course in Miracles almost sounds like a Buddhist tome or something, like a New Age. Like nobody's going to question the exact origins. I fast forwarded to the reception part of the Wikipedia article, and there they talk about the various critiques. You know, it was called a minor industry that is overly commercialized and overrated, and it was called Christianity Improved.
Yeah, it's about God.
Yeah.
It's about reinstating a relationship with God.
Yeah, and like you can call it kind of being a grifter, you can call it being an iconoclast. She's done what kind of all great personas have done. There are no original ideas. She has merely repackaged the better ideas of less charismatic people as her own. She's just like the vehicle.
And she says some interesting things about charisma in A Return to Love.
Which are?
That it's a charisma is like a spiritual term that refers to like God's light shining through you. And when you become a vessel for God's love. So God is love is like the thesis. And love is the only thing that's real. Fear is a hallucination. Yeah. The past doesn't matter. Only matters in that it's taken you here now to the present. Future in God's hands. You don't even have to worry about it. Live in the now, and the now is where miracles happen, Anna. Yeah, the now is when you get chaotically drunk and make out with 2 strangers at a bar. The now is when you're going into a K-hole in a gay guy's apartment, and you have to lie down in a dog bed even though there's no dog there. But I love this shit. Honestly, I've internalized it. It's already making my life better. Yeah, it has. I have to say, some haters tried to come at me online, and I prayed for them. I mean, it's really interesting because I wonder what the response to her will be like overall, because I think a lot of people are kind of getting wise to the fact that she's a bullshit artist. I mean, it's really interesting. Again, I don't think she's a bullshit artist. Well, like any great bullshit artist, she really has to be convinced of the stuff she's spewing. I think she really believes in it on some level. She's not a hollow or cynical person. I think she lives this way, and I think she's gotten herself onto a democratic debate stage. A national, global platform. She's like manifested her reality via using the methods she outlines in her self-help literature. Yeah, and I mean, if you like, she's a vessel for God's will, and I believe that God for God's come.
Like, I had all these boyfriends, and then if I told God to like come in me through the vehicle of Jesus.
Oh God.
But she's very compelling, and she's a good writer in a very basic sense.
She's a really fun writer.
She's a fun writer. The book breezes by. I scrambled to McNally Jackson and embarrassingly bought the book last night, and I'm already like on page 56. But basically, this is a very garden variety account of what it feels like to go from being a fairly intelligent woman in your 20s to being a fairly intelligent woman in your 30s. When it's like a normal leveling out and coming to terms with the world, which is repackaged then as like an act of radical self-acceptance, and therefore of kind of brotherly or sisterly love.
I'm still in my 20s.
Right.
So maybe that's why these lessons are landing a little
powerful,
harder for me.
But I mean, listen, I believe all of us struggled with like coming to a big city and having sort of addictive tendencies that didn't amount to full-on addiction, and having weight battles that didn't amount to being morbidly obese.
Well, she says that creative people, because God's love is already pouring into all of us, as God's calm is already pouring into us, as children of God, we are already perfect. God's love is pouring through us. Every creative act is like an act of God's will. And people who are truly creative, like ourselves, often turn to drugs and alcohol as a way of like, she's a Cancer, by the way.
Okay,
obviously
so she's a water sign, yeah.
So they often have addiction problems. I think Janis Joplin is the example she uses because, or maybe I actually read that in Eve Babbitt's book. Never mind. But she... because they have to dull themselves because it's so intense to be such a
because they
such
feel
a brilliant
everything
vessel.
at once. Yeah, they take on humanity's burden, much like Jesus,
and that we've been put on this earth.
But as creatives, we are narcissistic enough to believe that we're the only ones suffering through what we're suffering through. Though actually, she's really upfront in the preface. She says like, I was hurting and angry and vindictive and resentful, and I had a hunch that everybody else felt this way. So she does like a very brilliant maneuver that people our age don't do. She takes her personal experience and like generalizes it to the world at large in a very empathetic kind of act, whereas people our age tend to particularize.
Later on in the book, she talks about, let me see if I have a screenshot of this one. She talks about be like the difference between how we need people who both generalize and specialize.
Right. Kind of like us.
Kind of like us, yeah. Here's a part I wanted to read.
Yeah, we're going to do a close reading. We're chock full of quotes.
Vision is content. Material circumstances mere form. I have a friend who is running for political office. Having been in politics for many years, his tendency is to think that his political success depends on his being a good politician. But part of the decay of our social order has come about because we are governed by so many people who are politicians rather than leaders. Lyndon Johnson was a great politician, but not much of a leader. John Kennedy was a great leader, but not much of a politician. The strength of a positive vision for America, through its inspirational effects on all the people who want desperately to see our nation healed, will do more to get someone elected than any amount of conventional politicking. It will touch our hearts. I told my friend that the key to a successful campaign would be to surrender the campaign to the Holy Spirit and ask that it be used as an instrument of his peace. My friend said that sounded great, but he needed to figure out how to do that. I told him he didn't have to figure out anything. All you have to do is be willing, I told him, and the Holy Spirit will enter where he is invited. You'll be brilliant. You'll be charismatic. Don't try to figure out your message. Just ask God what he would have you say. Step back and have him lead the way.
Wow.
Some insight into the Marianne campaign, I feel.
Yeah, it's like a preemptive. Yeah, it's like...
it's very interesting, the stuff that she said. Like, later on, she talks about how she was dabbling and, like, being an angry left-winger. Mm-hmm. And then she learned to let go of her, like, resentments and fears and whatnot.
Well, it's a lot like Trump, whose personal folklore is, I was asked many times by Roger Stone and others to run for president. And as much as I wanted to, you know, Oprah asked me on air whether I would run for president. And I did, you know, it's like all this kind of, you know, like I said, I'd even go so far as to say she's the Trump of the left, because it turns out that the left wants an entertainer in office just as much as the right. And Obama kind of started the process in motion, but he was ultimately much too respectable and presidential. Like, he was still LARPing as a politician after all.
Mm-hmm.
And in a way, she's the right person to fit the bill because she's a performer and a personality, much like Roger Stone or Steve Bannon.
Mm-hmm.
And like, you know, I said in 2018, I like storied about this, that the left is incapable of producing eccentrics, but that was up until Marianne Williamson crept onto the world stage. And, you know, we're seeing a reversal with her. And of course, it doesn't hurt that she's also a woman.
And a beautiful one at that.
Yeah, and a beautiful one.
And a child of God.
Like in an era where people want order, but they are really exhausted by warlike masculinity.
And it's about ego death.
Yeah.
A return to love in a big and broader sense of the word.
Yeah, and my issue with the book as a whole, based on what I read, is that she never stops to define love. It's interesting because the book so far reads like kind of a watered down.
God is love.
Right, but what is God, right? It's like the thing within you, but it reads kind of like a watered down. Well, you know what
love is.
Well, no, actually, but it's interesting to define love because I think the most fruitful definition of love is subordinating your will to another, whether that means God or your family.
That's elaborated on later on in the book. Yeah. Okay,
because that's kind of like
that's what that's like what she's advocating for is, like ego death, relinquishing your will to God's will.
Yeah, and she's basically saying kind of a personal charisma based in messianic conviction is really what's going to get the votes, not being a good policymaker or like a good diplomat. I think the biggest caveat with people like her is that she's far more intelligent and kind of intellectually honest with herself than most people who would read her book would be.
Yeah.
So there's a
reading this book as like an intelligent thinking person, obviously there is many like inconsistencies.
Yeah.
But I think to read it holistically and take it for like the sum of all of its parts I don't know. I mean self-help is help. It like I felt better after reading it. I felt more like committed to it, alleviated certain anxieties I have about the future.
Yeah,
I mean, at least for the time being.
It's very kind of like Lashian in its like it's like Christopher Lash for women, to the degree that it talks about taking responsibility and kind of like it deals with kind of not direct but indirectly it deals with the idea of narcissism. But it also reminds me of that ominous point in Lash which he wrote in like 74 or 76 where he was like, you know, people, because they've been so discouraged by the political process, have retreated into spiritualism and self-help. And she's really smart in diagnosing that that's what people want in a candidate. Even people on the left, they're no longer concerned with being science and facts people or policy wonks. They're also caving into this like Game of Thronesian narrative of like a war of the kingdoms.
Right, entertainment.
Yeah, that's like based on affect. It's like that Maya Angelou quote. It's not what someone said or did, it's how they made you feel.
Right. Totally.
And like there's an anecdote in the first paragraph of the preface where she describes how her father took her to Saigon during the Vietnam War, so she could witness firsthand the violence and the carnage, which like, okay, that was immediately a red flag because I thought...
You don't believe her?
Well, I think she's either embellishing or he's a zealot, or he was stationed there and she's leaving that out and she was merely a military brat. I don't think that's the case, but but it's
I don't think they brought their families.
But it's very kind of like woke toddler magical thinking, like grafting morally flattering or spiritually uplifting narratives on a mundane reality after the fact.
You're really cynical.
I'm not cynical. I really I mean this in the nicest way possible. This is the essence of self-help.
Maybe I'm just more vulnerable.
But it's like recontextualizing the sad reality as something positive and uplifting. That's what self-help aims to do in a nutshell.
Of course. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, there's a whole part where she talks about AIDS. And she did a lot for like the AIDS crisis. She helped a lot of people. But that, it does require a level of like magical thinking. There's a part where she makes people write letters to their aides and it's really sad.
That's like those, have you seen those ads, like those Subway
kooky,
ads?
But like like people are saying that she told gay people to pray their aides away, which is like not what she did. She offered them like a framework of spirituality for processing something that was insanely like painful.
Well, at the time it was a death sentence.
And like, oh, you watched all your fucking friends die.
Yeah. So I think like
of it, and like this community was completely ravished by this horrible thing that like no one did anything about. And like at least Marianne gave them like a framework.
Yeah.
My voice is like crap. I'm like so passionate about Marianne. All
you're getting verklempt.
Maybe I'm like, I don't know. On the way over here, I was like, maybe I'm like just stupid now. Like maybe I'm just dumb, and like this is resonating with me because I'm like, I lack the faculties to truly be critical of it or something.
No, I mean, that's not entirely true. It resonated with me too. I thought it was a very like intoxicating and powerful book. It wasn't as dumb as a lot of the self-help books I read, probably because she was kind of okay with being self-effacing and jokey and kind of cynical. It wasn't like pure bullshit uplift, like feel-goodism.
But then I catch myself talking about like God and stuff now, and telling people like half ironically, right, that I'm like a child of God and stuff, but not in a, you know, I think that's how it starts.
What?
Ironically.
How you become a world
I'm
leader.
like ironically going to get into Marianne Williamson and then actually become like a kooky bitch.
Well, I think we're
but I think my life will
there.
be better for it if I do like allow myself to live more presently, if I do affirm like love rather than fear.
Well, okay, I mean this in the nicest way possible, but people, you are not the sum of your words or your actions, as self-help gurus are fond of saying. You are really, at the end of the day, the sum of the lies that you tell yourself, and some of those lies are productive. The happiest, longest living people are people who have found a way to lie to themselves, like, effectively. But like through whatever kind of mental gymnastics they have to go through.
Maybe there's something to that.
The thing with being like a paranoid, cynical person and thinking that you're better than everybody but the world is against you is that the world is not hostile so much as it's indifferent, unless you're literally like Palestinian or black and low income. But for most people.
Right.
And I really had to ask myself, like, who is the audience for this? There's actually interesting passage where she is talking about, she says, many of us know in our hearts that we never really grew up. The problem isn't that we're lost or apathetic, narcissistic, or materialistic. The problem is we're terrified. A lot of us know what we have what it takes, the looks, the education, the talent, the credentials, but in certain areas we're paralyzed. And this is like how you can tell that self-help is like a religion for hot and rich secular people, because what if you actually don't have the looks or the talent or the education or whatever?
Right. Yeah, that's a recurring theme in it as well.
Yeah, and I think that she's convincing us, having convinced herself, because she knew deep down inside that she was like a powerful and attractive and special person.
We are very much the demographic for this book.
Yeah, exactly.
That makes sense. Of course.
So I think the danger of self-help is that the people writing it are on some level more intelligent, or if you want to be cynical about it, more clever than the people who read it. So what you have is people then selectively kind of reading into it to rationalize their intellectual and psychological laziness.
Right. I mean, that's also probably what I'm doing.
Yeah.
And all of my impulses, I'm now like, well, God, I prayed on it. Okay, I have an anecdote.
Yeah.
So when the Sailor Socialism thing happened to me, I was at South by Southwest. I was getting iced coffee. I was talking to my producer about what parties we were going to go to that night, like what networking, filmmaker, mixers we were going to be seen at. I was pissed because I was disinvited from like a filmmaker brunch.
Why?
Because there wasn't enough room.
Okay. Not because you were a fascist, because this was before.
This was before I was a noted public figure, before I put socialism on the map. You're welcome. And I was wearing my adorable outfit, and I said, you know, I'm not really worried about being at the right place at the right time, because it's like in God's hands.
Right.
And then 5 minutes later, InfoWars ambushed me. And I think I did kind of say or utter a kind of like silent prayer that was like, I'll be at the right place at the right time. You know, I like affirmed that like something good would happen, and then something good did happen.
Well, yeah, that's true, but that's like that reminds me of the
and
whole,
that's magic and a miracle.
it's the power of positive thinking. But it reminds me of that quote she has about that I was kind of talking about, where she basically, it's like somewhere in my stories, I probably have to look it up, but she talks about how
That the Holocaust was not God's will.
yeah, I love how she said the Holocaust was not God's will and neither was AIDS. It was created by people. And I was like, was AIDS created by people? The AIDS crisis certainly was. Yeah, but she writes, sometimes we make the mistake of thinking other people don't have as much fear as we do, which only makes us more afraid. Maybe we know, maybe they know something we don't. Maybe we're missing a chromosome. Is she saying we're retarded?
Yeah.
But like
canceled.
she basically summarizes why you shouldn't be jealous of other people ever.
Uh-huh.
Because you can never know what they're going through, even if they seem like the most kind of unfairly successful people.
Right. Why all wise lessons.
Yeah,
man.
and it does violence to yourself and to others.
She tells an anecdote in here that's very funny where she was at a nail salon getting porcelain nails applied.
Okay.
By some like
Mink
old lady
eyelashes,
thing.
yeah.
And a woman came in, an acquaintance of hers came into the salon who she thought was so annoying. And every time this obnoxious woman opened her mouth, Marianne would shut. It was like nails on a chalkboard. She couldn't stand the sound of this woman's voice. But because she was getting her nails done, she couldn't leave. And because the woman doing her nails was like a client of her or whatever, a disciple of hers, she didn't want to like show that she was feeling annoyed and like unenlightened. So she said a little prayer. She prayed to God for a miracle. And she said at that moment, that woman started talking, the obnoxious woman, about her relationship with her father. And it dawned on Marianne that this woman suffered from extremely low self-esteem and had to develop a terrible personality that she thought would compensate for how much she hated herself. But all it did was drive people away. Right. And then Marianne decided to feel compassion for her. Well, and that's sort of the process I'm going to undergo with all of my haters as well.
Yeah, you're going to, when they go low, you're going to go high.
I'm going to go so high. I'm going to go straight up to heaven like a beautiful baby angel.
Yeah, I mean, it makes sense. I think the danger of her and then self-help as a genre in the end is that it's not wrong. It traffics in a lot of fundamental truths. It's just that the agenda is often troublesome. It's like the collective meaning of those truths.
Well, what's the agenda? To heal?
I mean, I think like at its worst, like the worst critique of self-help is that it basically allows people to preserve their narcissism. It's kind of like what they say about therapy. Like in the worst case, therapy gives people moral alibis through which to continue to lie to themselves and others. It makes them, she even talks about this. She's like, I became self-aware. I knew what my problems were. I could speak articulately about them. So people were like, oh, here's a enlightened young woman who's going to change. I think my most negative critique of this book is that the reissue doesn't have that foxy pic of her on the cover.
I know. But the quote on the back, our deepest fear is not that we're inadequate. Our deepest fear is that we are powerful beyond measure.
Sure, yeah.
That's good stuff,
Anna. That is good stuff. That really made me shed a single tear and bite my fist.
I know. Wow. Talk about miracles. We've been recording for an hour and 15 minutes.
I mean, this is like, Eric Fromm has a famous book about this. It's called Escape from Freedom. And Quentin Crisp talks about this. All of the great thinkers in my canon, they talk about basically how humans have spent their entire lives foisting responsibility for themselves onto others because they're terrified of the damage they can do if they harness their power. And then in the process, they end up doing way more damage. And she actually has a really interesting passage where she talks about like, I was so afraid of being powerful and taking control. And then I realized actually how powerful I was because I went from state to state creating all this like, human carnage.
I ruined my life. Yeah.
Like ruining. We can wrap it up if you want.
Are there any other excerpts you'd like to share?
I have an interesting kind of read on her as a person.
Yeah. Of course. I can keep going.
But like she basically, it's really interesting because she's Jewish and she talks at length about her Jewish upbringing and Jewish identity. Like she certainly doesn't hide it.
She still identifies as Jewish,
yeah.
Even though the framework of A Course in Miracles is sort of neo-Christian.
Yeah, and this made me, she sounds less like a Messianic Jew than like an evangelical Christian. Like the tone of the book is very evangelical. She's basically
Yeah.
proselytizing to people. But interestingly, she doesn't read as Jewish to me.
Huh. Yeah.
Like, she's not like a Barbara Streisand or even Eliza Minnelli, who's Italian, but reads in a very kind of Jewish way.
She's spunky.
She's spunky, but she's kind of, I don't know, devoid of maybe the casual warmth of most Jews. I don't know.
Have
I
you
haven't-
watched her speak publicly besides the debates?
No.
You should watch some of
I'll-
her. I mean, Paul Cupo attended also her like talks and stuff.
Mm-hmm.
He was there when she announced that she was going to run for president.
Oh, wow. Yeah, you were saying
I will
this,
be
yeah.
also talking about Marianne on Not Really podcast tomorrow. So subscribe to their Patreon if you.
We're going to really keep the grift atop
more.
the grift going.
I'm a parasite's parasite, baby.
Yeah. But it made me think of so many Jewish people I know who are basically like social workers or clinical therapists
Yeah.
because they have kind of a liberal background and a burning desire to relieve the suffering of strangers, through which they, of course, not only receive vicarious satisfaction by helping others, but
Right.
they can convert their socially inappropriate resentments into caretaking impulses. And
Yeah.
that's totally what she's doing here, but with kind of a Christian tint.
Yeah. So then why does she not seem Jewish?
I don't know.
You think she lacks a casual warmth? I think it's worth watching her speak.
I think maybe she's so thoroughly internalized this new agey post-Christian language.
Yeah.
She's not a person who.
Well, she's cured herself of neuroses.
Yeah, which is great. That's probably why, because she's not a
what you're
neurotic
picking
anymore.
up on. Yeah.
Yeah.
Although I don't know, she does seem at peace. I'd like to be at peace.
I mean, I'd be at peace too if I was a 66-year-old size 0 with like a perfectly taut face. Anybody can be at peace if they're, hot and relatively free of health problems at that age.
Right. And so full of love.
Do we have any more, any more observations?
I mean, it gets to be pretty redundant. The chapters are broken up into like your career, like how to use. I don't want to call it a method, I guess, because it's more about like a way of.
Does she actually offer any prescriptions toward the end of the book? I didn't get there yet.
She says like we pray. It's like about prayer, and then she ascribes little prayers for various.
Mm-hmm.
You say like, God grant me the. You don't say like, God, can I be skinny and have a lot of money? You say like, I'm open to your will or whatever.
God, make me stop worrying about being fat.
Yeah, basically.
You
And
have
then
to
you'd
like
be surprised
intellectualize
at what
it.
happened. Yeah.
Yeah.
On earth as it is in heaven. Amen. She says that we're already in heaven. The heaven is the present. There is no other time.
Yeah, that it's only a matter of like giving up your biases and neuroses and accessing it.
That our
it's in
purpose on
everybody.
earth is to heal
Yeah.
and to heal the world.
She sounds like a Prince song. I'm not your lover. I'm not your friend. I am something that you'll never comprehend.
I kind of feel like I was put on the earth to be charming a little bit,
Mm-hmm.
to be a good guest at a party.
Well, that's like Fran Lebowitz's criteria, right? Like, I forgot what the first one was, but it was like, does it know its place and is it charming? That's a good rule to live by.
I mean, yeah, to be lovable.
Yeah.
I think fun with my
I was
friends,
brought on this
to
earth
have
to
fun
like
with
get
my
nailed to the
friends.
cross for saying totally not controversial things, but I did it to myself.
Someone's
and I'll
gotta
take
do
it.
it.
Yeah.
It's God's will. Anna.
Yeah. Allah's will.
Allah's will.
When I convert to Islam, it's over for you hoes. She does talk about how it is like accepting love is a matter of submission.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, which all religious communities have understood from day one. But it's really interesting because somebody said of this woman, what's her name, who wrote the original book, Helen Schumann, that she didn't say anything original. She was just kind of mixing up existing kind of pagan and Eastern and Christian ideas about the world.
I mean, yeah, there's a whole part about what's it called, resurrection and like reincarnation that I kind of skimmed through because it was. I mean, all of this stuff has been articulated in many different forms since the dawn
dawn of time. Yeah.
Yeah.
Here's a quote that we can leave everyone with that kind of folds back
wonderful.
to our previous convo about the Antifa.
Perfect.
Quote, many people have felt their heads crack open in some way and then have admitted it to their friends. These days, it's not an uncommon phenomenon. People are crashing into walls today, socially, biologically, psychologically, and emotionally. But this isn't bad news. In a way, it's good. Until your knees finally hit the floor, you're just playing at life. And on some level, you're scared because you know you're just playing.
Beautiful.
Yeah, a quote for the Trump age, if I ever saw one.
See you in heaven.
Yeah, see you in heaven.